Mr. Speaker, I thank you for giving me an opportunity to, as part of the Senate, to record my thanks on the speech of the President during the opening of the 13th Parliament. But before I do that, let me also appreciate the young men and women who have visited the Senate today from Nyandarua and encourage them to continue following the deliberations in this House so that they too can be part of the nation building. Mr. Speaker, it's important for the students to realize that our work in the Senate is to be able to correct, criticize, and also oversight on our county governments. So I hope that when you go back to Nyandarua, you will be able to share our gratitudes to the people of Nyandarua. Mr. Speaker, now to the speech of the President. Let me say that my job here as a senator is not to praise the President for giving a speech, but it's to be able to analyze and criticize and critique and correct the speech of the President so that it can be meaningful to this nation. Mr. Speaker, the speech of the President, in my view, and this is my own view, was a bit utopian. It was wishful thinking, it was brief, and when you follow the speech from the beginning, the President was trying to be able to build consensus. He wanted to be able to get a buy-in for his policies, which is not a bad thing. I think in every democracy, any leader would want to be able to have his policies or her policies adopted in a bipartisan approach. So I will not fault the President by doing that. I think even if I was the one seated in that seat, the first thing I would seek to do is to entice, seduce, and try to buy in so that the people who are supposed to be criticizing, oversighting my work can also be able to dance to my tune. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be very brief but straight to the point, and I'll go straight to the issue that to me was an invitation for this House to amend the Constitution through the back door. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues have alluded to Article 153 of the Constitution, which mandates every cabinet secretary to appear before a committee of the House, either National Assembly or the Senate, if they are invited. Mr. Speaker, if I read from the President's speech and his wishes, is that I would only conclude that the President would want us to go back to a parliamentary system. And in fact, not only a parliamentary system, but a Westminster kind of system, where the representatives elect one of their own to become the head of government so that they can be accountable to them in that House. Mr. Speaker, if this Parliament goes ahead and follow through with the proposal made by the President, we will be amending Article 153 of the Constitution, which is quite explicit and very clear. It states as follows: a cabinet secretary shall attend before a committee of the National Assembly or the Senate when required by the committee to answer any questions concerning a matter for which a cabinet secretary is responsible. Mr. Speaker, I dare say that in this House, apart from the representative, or rather the senators who are elected and the other ones who are nominated, the only other person who is supposed to stand where I'm standing right now is either the clerk or the sergeant-at-arms helping us. Mr. Speaker, in fact, a very good example that I can use to be able to demonstrate to the public that any other person who stands here is a stranger is one of our own, Mr. Speaker. Hypothetically, if my dear sister, Senator Sige, the nominated senator, would have come in on the day where the president was addressing the two houses of parliament, my dear sister would not have been allowed to sit where she's seated right now. She would have been asked to sit at the speaker's gallery because she was a stranger. Even though she was nominated, until she was sworn in as a senator, she was still a stranger. The only reason why she can now comfortably sit where she's seated is because she's taken the oath. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to invite my colleagues to relook at Article 153 very, very carefully, and also look at Article 125 of the Constitution, which is what my good friend and colleague, Senator from Nandi, was referring to, in terms of has the Senate or the National Assembly having quasi-judicial powers to summon witnesses. Mr. Speaker, as the House of Reason and as the other arm of government, I would really like to beseech my colleagues for us to move away from this language of referring to each other as the opposition and the government. Mr. Speaker, in this House, I don't see any opposition. What I see is another independent arm of government, which is the legislative arm of government, which is tasked in making legislation. Mr. Speaker, when I refer back to the speech of the President, I want to make some comments, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the judiciary. I welcome the support given by the President to the judiciary. I welcome the respect which the President demonstrated, first by appointing the 6 judges who the previous administration had not appointed, despite numerous court orders. That was a good move, Mr. Speaker. It is also good to be able to allow the judiciary to control its own purse. My concern is, and this is what I hope we will not be able to fall into, and I will compare apples to apples, Mr. Speaker. In the event that the President can be able to stand and say, I will give the judiciary X amount of money. In the event that the President stands and say, I will approve the oversight kitty for the Senate. I will push for CDF. So we all become gullible and we say, hooray, Mr. President. Let it be reminded to all Kenyans that the person or the body that controls the purse is this Parliament. We are the ones that divide the money between the two levels of government. It is us. When the President says, I will be able to set aside money or increase money to the judiciary so that they can be able to conclude the cases on corruption, I think the President should come and say, I will seek Parliament to approve my proposals. Because when the executive brings a budget here, it is a proposal until Parliament approves it or disapproves it. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind Kenyans that the moment that we start respecting the principle of separation of powers or the check and balance system is the time that we will develop as a democracy. I have no beef, Mr. Speaker, with the President proposing to set up a fund for 50 billion shillings to be able to help Kenyans. I've got no beef with that. But it's something that we in Parliament must be able to consider. We must be able to look at the budget and ask ourselves, in one hand, Mr. Speaker, the President is proposing to cut the budget by 300 billion shillings. In another hand, he's suggesting to increase the budget by 50 billion shillings to be able to create what he calls as the Hustlers Fund. If the president would have been able to take us step by step, demystify where these 300 billion will be deducted from, I would be giving a different opinion. But as I stand now, or I think stands now, in the speech of the president, it was more like a statement, because he didn't give details on how this money, where this money was going to come from. Mr. Speaker, I now get into the issue which is very, very important. And I do hope that this House will take very, very careful measures in agreeing to it. In his address, in line number 20, the President suggested as follows, and I'm going to read it so that I can be able to prosecute it. He says, we are on mission to dramatically scale up productivity in agriculture. Mr. Speaker, he continues and says, and make sure that every Kenyan farmer, fisherman, and pastoralist contribute to sustainable economic growth by contributing to adequate and affordable food. About, I think, a week ago, Mr. Speaker, we all woke up to news that the cabinet had approved the lifting of the ban on GMOs. Mr. Speaker, the only way you can be able to scale up productivity in agriculture in this country today, Mr. Speaker, when we are facing severe droughts, is by altering the genetics of any crop which is planted here. Mr. Speaker, before we do that, I would like to beseech both the executive and this House to be able to educate Kenyans on the dangers that are there in altering the genetics of any food or any crop. Some of them include resistance to antibiotics. Some of them include resistance to allergens, whereby everybody will be allergic to everything. And also, most importantly, in a country where there are so many people who are poor, it reduces on the nutritional value of the food. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to be open and careful when we come to this suggestion. And finally, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the CDF and the issue of the Senate Oversight Fund, my views are a little bit unorthodox, Mr. Speaker, in the sense that we are a legislative arm of government, and that money should not be coming to the Senate or the National Assembly. That money should be sent to county governments so that we can be able to promote devolution. And we find a mechanism where members of both houses can be part of a committee that ensure that they scrutinize the budget. And the budget has to become a project-based budget. Mr. Speaker, because my time is over, and I'd hope that I had so much time, I want to end by stating as follows. Let us not temper with Mother Nature. Let us be very careful on this issue of GMO, because the moment we alter the genetics of anything that goes into our stomachs without being able to tell citizens who do not have access to that information, is the day that Mother Nature will be pissed off with us and will end up creating or encouraging more diseases to come into this country. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and I do hope that my dear friend who is saying that I'm out of order can pick an English dictionary and see what pissed off means. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.